Yo,
What?
up. Between the two of us, we made a whole sentence.
We did. We should do the whole recording like that. We just finish each other's.
Sentences. Woo!
You did it.
We did it. We could do it, I think, at this point. This season, we'll be cruising into our 500th episode. I imagine Kathy and I could finish each other's sentences at this point. Not that we couldn't before that. We might have been able to do it before that, but now we definitely can. Let's talk about this question of, do scary stories have the capacity to heal us? Do they have benefits to our mental health? Are they detrimental to our mental health? And we would like to present a few arguments on both sides of that, I think, today, and then see where we fall.
Sure.
See, we're obviously horror fans, so it might be really obvious where we fall, and we're also therapists, so that might make it obvious. But also, there are pros and cons to the whole thing.
And context is important. So in what way are we defining healthy versus unhealthy? I mean,
Right. What's the context?
What's the context?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I wanted to start out by just talking a little bit about, horror and fear is as old as time. I mean, one of the things that bonds us as human beings is the universal, timeless, and cross-cultural nature of horror and our fears. So obviously horror has a lot of our human fears in it. And it's one of the reasons why we watch it. And it crosses cultures. Like I said, it's universal. There are certain types of fears that are ancient, ancestral. They call them atavistic fears that we all have. And atavistic just means based in ancestry. And so, for instance, our fear of being eaten, our fear of being prey, because many thousands of years ago, that was our experience, is that we were trying to survive and waiting for a large carnivorous animal to come and eat us. And so what do we have now? We have monster movies. We have that fear. And that's one of the things that those kinds of movies are playing into. Another one might be the idea of the mythical creature, the Dracula, werewolf, witches, zombies, etc., that is strong, unstoppable, and hungry. And that is one of those fears as well that we all can relate to because of our ancestry in mythology and our stories and our biology. It's in our system. It's in our biology. And, one of the most interesting things about, I think, the mythological creatures is that the thing about a vampire or a ghost or a zombie is that they are utterly human, except for one thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like vampires are human, except they're like us, except they're undead. It's like they look like us. Obviously we talk about teeth and all of that, but like they're very human. It's not Godzilla coming to eat us.
That's right.
We're not prey, right?
Yeah.
Or ghosts. Ghosts are like us. They are us. They were us. They just have no body.
No, it makes sense. I mean, I'm going to do a couple of episodes on the origin of queer horror.
Yeah,
right?
I can't wait.
And a lot of that, we talk about just the embodiment of what we are fearful of. And, a little teaser is just the discussion around how monsters became the embodiment of homosexuality. And so when we fear things, it's often things that mirror us or things that we are the most afraid of or the most hated that we see in others. That is more terrifying than an abstract thing without form. Like we are afraid of our own species.
Right. And when one thing is off, when one thing is different about us, which you can make that correlation too.
A lot is off about you.
A lot is off about, well, That's not very nice. No, I'm just kidding. I'm entirely human, except she broke down and fell over and cried in the middle of this episode. It's like zombies. They're utterly human, except for the way they move.
And without conscience, right?
Yeah.
They don't have...
Yeah, that's the amazing thing about zombies is that it's relaxing to us. So this might be one of the very kind of specific benefits to watching zombies in particular. But you could make this argument for a lot of different mythological creatures. But specifically for zombies is that they have no moral complexity.
That's right.
And so it can be very relaxing for us. Mm-hmm. We might get scared and we're watching The Walking Dead and it's terrifying and what's going to happen next. But it's relaxing because we're living out a fantasy of no moral complexity, of not being held to those morals, of society's morals.
And we're terrified of that and intrigued by that all at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's also, so it might be relaxing because of the no moral complexity, but it's an atavistic fear of death and infection that we all have.
Right.
So it's both. And that dialectic is what you're sitting with and your psyche is playing with when you're watching, I'm just using zombies as an example, but.
No, but we know that during COVID, pandemic, among some of these other movies, became the most popular, most streamed movies ever because, again, it was like in real time, real fear.
Yes.
We want to be close enough to it.
Yes.
But also far enough back as a way of maybe trying to control it.
Absolutely.
Understand it.
Absolutely.
Or even a morbid curiosity of being the fear.
Yes, of course. And it burns calories. All right.
It does.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the benefits. Let's go with some benefits, maybe.
Well, first of all, I think in context, we want to, when we're talking about benefits, and I sort of noted this just a second ago, is clearly we only like it when we actually feel safe.
Sure.
Right. So
right.
We know that there are a lot of immersive experiences with haunted houses now where people sign waivers and get locked in freezers. And some people may like that, but the general public really only likes that when they know that they're immersed in this experience, but they are actually safe. So there's that.
Yeah, I don't like those ones where there's the idea that I could actually get hurt,
suffocate, or break an arm, or
no, I'm good,
never come back.
I am risk averse. Like I don't have a personality.
Well, that level of risk is
that's what I'm saying. Like I'm not the personality that's bungee jumping and da. You know what I mean? It's like I can imagine that some personalities would get a huge dopamine rush from that.
Dr. Cynthia Hoffner, I believe is how you pronounce it. She's a researcher at Georgia State University, says that the research suggests that horror fans also tend to be people who enjoy intellectual stimulation and imaginative activities, and many are sensation seekers. For those of us who might be prone to anxiety or nervousness, scary movies provide new focal points. So for someone who tends to be someone who worries or is somatically anxious, meaning like maybe they worry about their health or they experience bodily sensations as part of their anxiety, when you sit and watch a horror movie and you're immersed into that anxiety, it helps the brain shift to something more productive in that moment that then relieves the real stress and takes the pressure off of what actually could be causing harm. So it shifts to a different focus, which I think is, there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I could see that working for some people.
Dr. Colton, I believe it's Scrivener or Scrivener. He's a researcher at the, sorry, Colton. Dr. Colton S.
Just call him Dr. Scriv.
Part of it, Colton, is that I just can't read my handwriting.
Yeah, that is a part of it.
He's a researcher, and I've talked about the Recreational Fear Lab on the show before. It's in Denmark. Found that horror fans experience less pandemic-related psychological distress than non-fans. So control of emotions, management of terrifying situations. Let's go into this just one step further.
Maybe.
Oh my God.
I'm scared.
The enhanced autonomic nervous system. That's our fight or flight response that goes off, right? It's very primal, right? It's what's allowed us to survive as a species. So the fight or flight, the arousal you feel lasts actually long after the movie, and then transfers to the positive things that come after. So if Shannon and I go to see a horror movie that terrifies the hell out of us, and our autonomic nervous system is fight or flight, and our amygdala is going off, and all this anxiety that we've channeled into this really good place, that feeling lingers because the brain doesn't really know yet that we've left the theater. It's still on that high. But the paired situation that's happening right there is that I'm hanging out with Shannon and we're also laughing about how anxious we are, or
Eating
maybe
popcorn.
how bad the movie was. Maybe I'm sick because I ate a whole large popcorn. And so this is called the excitation transfer process. It's a paired association. So if you are pairing this feared stimulus with something fun, well, that's enabling, isn't it? We want more of that.
They actually have talked about how it burns calories. So let's have a very serious conversation. No, I made a joke earlier about how it burns calories, but I do want to tell you that this is like a what the hell for fear research, because a study published by the University of Westminster got 10 whole people. 10 whole people.
That is a very
Like
small
their sample
pool.
size was massive.
Yeah.
To
10 people.
watch different horror films. The people taking part had their hate monitored. No, the people taking part had their heart rate monitored, as well as their oxygen intake and carbon dioxide output. Can you imagine watching a horror movie
With all that shit on?
and you're being monitored like that? The heaviest person that took part out of the 10 burned 184 calories while watching the movie. This is the same number of calories that you would burn during a weightlifting session or a walk. So there's no excuse not to watch a horror movie.
That's right.
I'm
you don't
just
even have to do
saying.
anything except watch it.
These are very important.
Well, a
Qualities.
10-person sample pool, that has to be generalizable for sure.
Well, I mean, they also talk about how it can help relieve depressive feelings, of course, because you get an adrenaline, you get adrenaline rushes and that dopamine rush, and you're working through your fears. But quite simply, you're getting the jumps and the scares and the excitement that you experience can hypothetically cause like feelings of euphoria, happiness, and which would in turn reduce your stress, right? So,
Well, and while we're on the topic of stress,
yeah.
we know that chronic ongoing stress is really poorly correlated with cognitive function. So the more stressed we are, we start our memories affected, our ability to concentrate is affected, our ability to be present is affected, to execute personal, decision making, all of that is affected. That's our cognition, right? So ongoing stress affects that. It also breaks down our immune system. Those of you who might be graduate students, have you ever noticed that you'll be working really hard through a semester, and the second there's like spring break or summer comes along and you might have like a week off, you get sick because your body's just been holding on to this stress, and then it's like,
And then you let it flow.
and now you're in bed with the flu or a head cold or something, okay? So when we have chronic ongoing stress, it reduces our cognitive function and it breaks down our immune system. However, research will show that small, manageable amounts of stress and discomfort, such as watching a horror movie, can actually strengthen our immune system. So I would make that equivalent to if you maybe get inoculated for something, you get a little piece of the virus in there, right? Not the whole thing, just a little bit. And then the body goes, I can fight that. Now I'm stronger. A little bit more. I can fight that. Now I'm stronger. Okay. It's the same thing. It's that it's these small doses of stress that the immune system, the cognitive function starts to go, oh, a little bit at a time, I'm going to start conditioning. Yoga does the same thing. When we think about why is yoga so good, yoga puts us in these really uncomfortable positions. And if you're doing hot yoga, even more so, that teaches us that we can get through that discomfort. It's good for our body. We're present. It's mindful. And then we come out of that going, that was uncomfortable, but I'm okay. We're putting stress on the body. We're also doing really good things for our body, but it's stressful in that moment. It's the same type of thing where we're building a stress tolerance, where you and I have had various episodes on how our stress tolerance in general has significantly gone down because of technology and instant gratification. So having small doses of good stress, it helps us then in periods in real life where we might have more intense periods of stress. It's like, okay, my body's a little bit more equipped.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you're watching a stressful film, like, it doesn't have to be horror, but anything that puts you into that stress response, we're intentionally exposing ourselves to that anxiety stimuli or whatever it is. And we also usually don't engage in the same unhealthy coping mechanisms when we're watching a movie than we might in real life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, except for Kathy's popcorn addiction.
Listen,
she's not gonna be, harming anyone. Well, I mean, except for me, maybe if I took her popcorn away, but we would manage stress differently during watching that moment. And we would tap into what you're talking about, resilience, because we wouldn't be trying to muffle with a maladaptive coping strategy.
Well, if you tried to take the popcorn away,
right,
you might get usually sit to my left, like an elbow, my left elbow in your face.
Sure.
Or rib.
It could happen.
Yeah.
And then I would be having a paired experience with that horror movie.
You would never eat popcorn again.
I would.
Or not ever see that movie again.
Sit next to you ever.
But again, I would think that would be called a maladaptive stress response.
I feel like if you chose violence, that would be maladaptive.
Don't take my fucking popcorn away and we won't have this problem.
You usually offer me some anyway.
Well, now what I do, not to digress, is I get I get the large, and it comes with an automatic refill.
That last time we went, that's what happened.
They're like, do you want your refill now so you don't have to get up? I'm like, yes. And then I just hand it to Shannon.
Fucking 2 huge things of popcorn. And I'm like, what did you do? Buy the whole store?
They just looked at me and they go, you need more.
You're like, no, it's free. It's part of it. I'm like, wait, what?
If you get the large at AMC,
you get a free refill.
And you can get it right then and there.
Which is hilarious, because the idea of the free refill is that you wouldn't need it, right? Like, they're offering you something that most people aren't going to leave the movie to go get.
But they throw out so much popcorn at the end of the night.
I know, exactly. Like, I'm never going to get the refill, so I never get the large. But Kathy would.
I might. And then I go home sick. I have to eat a bowl of cereal before bed, because I have to coat the stomach from all of the... Anyway, we're getting off track.
It's a whole thing. So I did want to talk a little bit about how horror movies might not be the best thing for your mental health, because we did want to provide both sides of it. And this is just the idea of where you want to fall and what it is for you, right? Experiencing emotions like fear, stress, and shock while knowing deep down that we're actually perfectly safe can be cathartic, like what you were saying. However, watching horrific things can also, especially if you have a lot of anxiety, you suffer from huge anxiety, panic attacks, etc. Watching horrific images can trigger those unwanted thoughts and feelings that you might feel in your life and give you increased levels of anxiety or panic, and even increase our sensitivity to startle eliciting stimuli. So what they're sort of saying is that you could develop a startle response that maybe you didn't have before, or it can get worse. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It making those of us like who are already anxious more likely to respond negatively and misinterpret the sensations as real threats, like me taking the popcorn.
Yeah,
you might actually say, this is actually a threat and I have to elbow her in the face.
I think it would be less thoughtful. I think it would just be really immediate. impulsive.
It's a startle eliciting response. So you would have been startled by me taking the popcorn, and then you would punch me.
Something like that.
Because you would think I was an actual threat when I'm actually
Well,
not.
anyone takes my popcorn, that's an actual threat.
But you can get a refill.
I'm not getting up.
So it's not making sense.
Okay. Well, we have new policies at AMC.
We have new rules. All right. It can also make it harder to sleep. So they're talking about how, the excited response that is part of watching a horror film, to get the benefits that we're looking at, you need to have the excited response when you're watching the horror film. And they're saying that, the frightening things we've seen on the screen can trigger nightmares. It can disrupt REM sleep. It can make it just generally harder to sleep, because also your brain is trying to process sometimes negative emotions. And if those negative emotions are playing right into the stress of the day, you could end up having poor sleep. And then, of course, as we know, poor sleep is linked to other things if it was like over time. So, of course, the other thing I'll say about a possible negative effect is that certain people have a lot of trouble with boundaries. I do think that one of the things about watching horror respectful of yourself, let's put it that way, is to identify and define what your boundaries are about things, and to avoid the images and sensations that make you, I would say, overly uncomfortable or trigger these negative things, trigger the lack of sleep, trigger, startle responses, make you feel worse, make your anxiety worse. There are things in horror movies that we all put our hands over our eyes for. There are things in movies that I will choose that moment to use the restroom.
Yes, agreed.
And that's how I navigate it. I know over time, and my boundaries have shifted over time as well, where there are things where I used to take my bathroom break during that kind of scene. I don't actually necessarily always have to now. And I can actually see the value in the story of whatever the thing is.
Why that's there.
Of why that's there. Is it uncomfortable? Yes. But I have worked through a lot of my fears. And so we get better. So, of course, I feel as if that has been a benefit to watching horror for me, is that I am more resilient with things that I find uncomfortable. I can actually tolerate being uncomfortable. I don't have to leave the room.
And that's different from being jaded.
Exactly. I still have the feelings.
Yes.
They're not blunted at all.
Right.
I feel the feelings, but then I'm resilient enough to watch the thing I don't like, feel the feelings, have a reaction to it, and work through that, as opposed to having to leave the room. However, all this for me is that horror films have been good for my mental health, but I can see how someone who has difficulty defining their own boundaries and understanding who they are and who they aren't, and a sense of self and all that, because we deal with a lot of mentally ill people, might find it very difficult to navigate the horror landscape, because they might unintentionally expose themselves to tons of triggers that are unnecessary, like in the instance of children. We did an episode last week around the horror films that made us, and how we were both Gen X and exposed far too early to horrifying things. And there is an argument for that not being a great thing for kids, right? But so if you can't navigate your boundaries, it might be a detrimental thing.
I can see that too, because while you're talking about this, my mind also goes to, I wonder if they broke it down by types of horror, because torture porn and slashers are different from thrillers and different from X, Y, and Z.
Well, and it's going to be different for different people.
It's going to be different for different people.
Some people are going to watch torture porn type of movies, and that's the stuff that really gets them in that place where they're working through their fears, and that's the thing that helps them with their PTSD or whatever. And not so much for others.
Right. It's interesting how it really just depends on the person, because One thing that we also know is with all of this information you and I have just gone over, we know that horror films now are being used experimentally for treating post-traumatic stress disorder and certain phobias. And by using horror as a form of exposure therapy, so if which means someone's repeatedly exposed to things that trigger anxiety in a closely regulated environment. So going back to your comment about how it could trigger a memory in a more contained environment like therapy, right? This is why we don't do PTSD therapy at home.
Right.
Or with
our friends.
Or what's the cult leader's name that we did
Teal Swan.
Teal Swan, right? You got to know what you're doing, because just by opening that and not having any sort of structure or containment around that, but given the correct environment, the appropriate environment, maybe it's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Scream therapy.
I like it.
I mean, that's what we do when we go to all the spooky events that we're going to be going to.
And then we have Exorcist, Saw. There's so much.
There's so much coming out, and there's so much to scream about for sure. And I just want to, I guess in closing, unless you had something else, I wanted to talk a little bit about how when you're watching a horror film and you're in the moment and you're eating your popcorn and you've dimmed the lights and there's that atmosphere, there is so much that goes into the feelings that you get from those movies. So if you really think about it, the use of silence, the use of isolation, the atmosphere, the sound, the music, the lighting, the camera angles, the speed of the camera angles, the movement, the stillness. There's just so much that affects us and affects our affect when you're watching a horror film. And I think some people get that from war films. Some people get that from comedies, right? Like anything that elicits an affect from you, or like a romance that's really sad for you, and you watch it every time you get sad and you watch this particular movie because it makes you cry, and that gives you that affect experience you're looking for. Horror is the same way. And when we review movies, when we talk about films, when we talk about franchises, that's kind of what we're talking about as well. Like, how did these films affect us affectively? That's always got to be, in my opinion, part of somebody's movie review when they talk to me about a movie. Like, how did it make you feel? Oh, I was uncomfortable. I was scared. Oh, I laughed out loud. Oh, I was so surprised. Oh, this one character, I hated them. I wanted everyone to die. You hear those things all the time in the horror community. I hated them all and they all should die. It's like that was psychologically restorative for you because we can't go to our workplaces and do that. We might say it to our buddies, but like, those kinds of comments with regards to real people are not tolerated.
Right.
But we can say them about the characters in horror movies. So
absolutely.
So much of this is like deeply psychological. And of course, that's our whole premise here on the show, but it's fun. It's like you can get all of those affective experiences without having to tell your trauma story, which I think is what is really enticing about this for a lot of people.
So it's like somewhat cryptic.
Yeah. But yeah,
I like that.
Let's get back to watching horror flicks, man, because I would like to get healthier.
Yes, that's why we do it.
I would like to heal now. Thank you.
This is actually a self-care channel.
Yeah. Aliens and Exorcists. Welcome to our world.
That sounds like a great band name.
Aliens and Exorcists.
Yeah.
Maybe Mannequin Uprising will think about a name change.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening, you guys. Please take a moment to leave us a glowing review on Spotify or iTunes, and follow us on all the social medias, which are linked down in the description. And if you'd like to become a patron of ours, we would love to have you in our community. There's a ton of extra content over there. But we bid you adieu. Come back, because we're just about to talk about the Alien franchise next time, and it's going to be a good one.
It is.
This has been an episode of Terror Talk. My name is Shannon.
My name is Kathy. Please sleep safe.